Alright, hello. Today we're going to take a look at Unit 4, Creating the American Republic. We're going to get through Part 1, so we're going to get through part of the unit today. So, to start with, we looked at the Articles of Confederation. Articles of Confederation was the first government of the United States. Some people look at the Articles of Confederation and look at it as being the first Constitution of the United States. The Articles of Confederation provided for a strong state government and a weak central government. This was done because of the fears of what had happened under Great Britain with their strong federal government. Now, this caused a lot of weaknesses within the Articles. We really focus on two of them, with economics and military. With the economics, the federal government couldn't collect money. They couldn't tax citizens, so they had no money to operate. And then they weren't able to have a standing military. Even if they were able to have a military, they didn't have any way of collecting money to be able to pay the people in the military. So these caused two major problems with the Articles of Confederation. These problems led to Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion took place when Daniel Shays led other farmers on a rebellion. They started this rebellion because, like Daniel Shays, many of these farmers fought in the American Revolution. They helped the United States win this war. Let alone, they didn't get paid for it. Because, again, we didn't have any money to pay these soldiers. And then because they didn't get paid, they were losing their farms. So they were really upset. They fight for the independence of America. And then where they come back to, they're losing their farms. So this really exposed weaknesses in the Articles of Confederation. So they started this rebellion, and because you didn't have a strong government, you had no military to put them down, and it raged on. And it wasn't until the state governments were finally able to raise some funds in Massachusetts and stop this rebellion. But what it really seen is other states are like, this could happen here. So they decided that they had to do something. So originally they were going to get together and fix the Articles of Confederation. What they did instead was they formed their Constitutional Convention, and they decided to form an entire new government. Now, within this, there were a couple of issues that really took place, and it led to a couple of major compromises. Within this class, we really only focused on two of those issues, one of which was representation. Let's start with the large states. So you had the large states that supported the Virginia Plan, and the biggest part of the Virginia Plan is they wanted representation in a federal Congress to be represented by representation based purely on population. The more people you have, the more representatives you should have. Well, the small states thought this was unfair, so they came up with their own plan, which was called the New Jersey Plan. And in the New Jersey Plan said representation in Congress should be equal. Every state should have equal representation. The two sides were able to come up with a major compromise. So major, it was called the Great Compromise. Within the Great Compromise, you had three branches of government. You had two houses of Congress. The upper house of Congress within the compromise said that each state would get 2 representatives. And in the lower house, they were going to have representation based on population, so both sides got what they wanted. The other major thing that came out of this was counting slaves. So in those states that had slaves, they wanted to count slaves as part of their population so they get more representatives in Congress. Well, the states that didn't have them said it was unfair. Why should you be able to count your property when you're thinking about representation in Congress? So again, they came to a compromise on counting the slaves, and this was known as the Three-Fifths Compromise. So they would count slaves as 3/5 of a person when determining how many people were in that state and determining how many representatives they would get in Congress. The next thing we took a look at was, where do we get these values from? Did we just come up out of the air and pull these things as we formed our own government? No. What we did is we looked to history. James Madison was purported to have read every single constitution ever written in the world. And he borrowed ideas from those documents to help form our own government. So when you're looking at this, they also wanted to learn from the past of what didn't work. So some of the major things that came out of this, you have republicanism, you have limited government, checks and balances, and separation of powers. We pulled some of those ideas from other governments that were established. Some of those governments we pulled from was we did pull some from England, we pulled some from the Roman Republic, and again from our own American experience when we looked at the Magna Carta. So we looked at these historical venues as we created our own government. So as we gathered these ideas, we really had some principles. We spent a lot of time really focusing on 6 principles. You had republicanism, which was voting. And then you had people could alter, abolish, or form their new government, which is exactly what the Constitution was. It was forming a new government. So if the government got so bad that you had to stop doing part of it or get rid of it altogether, that it is built into our Constitution that we're able to do that. And then, of course, being able to alter it, we've altered our own government 27 times. We have 27 amendments in our Constitution. Limited government was another huge thing we looked at. We didn't want the government to have too much power because we didn't want them to abuse their powers. And then the next 3 we took a look at really fall within this idea of limited government. You have federalism, the idea of sharing powers between state and federal government, and some powers that both governments share, again, to prevent the abuse of power. You have checks and balances. You have each branch of government has the power and authority to oversee the other branches to make sure they're not abusing their powers, limiting the government again. And then finally, you had separation of powers. Each branch of government has specific powers that they have. Again, not giving all the powers to one branch of government, limiting the power of government to prevent the abuse of power. So, as we kind of briefly talked about, you have separation of powers. You have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Powers are divided between these 3 branches of government, and each branch has a specific power. You have the legislative branch. Only the legislative branch can make laws. In the executive branch, only the executive branch enforces the laws, and the judicial branch is the only branch of the government that's able to interpret the laws. Again, separating the specific powers to prevent the abuse of powers from giving all those powers in one single branch. Another thing we took a look at was checks and balances. Each branch has the authority to oversee the actions of the other branches of government. So when you're talking about the judicial branch, they check both the other branches by determining if their laws and actions violate the Constitution. Well, then you have the executive branch oversees the judicial branch by appointing people to this branch of government. And then Congress has a power to check them by being able to approve who gets appointed to those positions. Congress has the power to make laws, but then the executive branch has the power to veto the laws if they want. So each branch can oversee what the other branch does to make sure that they don't abuse their powers. Now, this caused a lot of debate. A lot of disputes came about approving the Constitution. One of the biggest disputes that came about this was protecting the rights of citizens. You had 2 groups that really came to the forefront. You had the Federalists who supported the Constitution, and you had the Anti-Federalists who did not support the Constitution, really mainly on the fact that there was nothing in there that protected the individual rights of the citizens. So eventually the Federalists agreed to add the Bill of Rights to protect the individual rights of citizens if the Anti-Federalists would approve the Constitution. So what this really was all about? This was all about the Bill of Rights. And the main purpose of the Bill of Rights was to protect the rights of individual citizens against the abuse of powers of the federal or the central government. So if you need a refresher on all parts of this, you want to take a look at your notes that we did in class. Just a couple of main points with the amendments. With the First Amendment, we talked about your right to free speech. You have the right to really say what you want. You have the right to write. You have the right to petition. So we looked at those things. And then most importantly, you have the right to free religion. We did look at the Second and Third Amendments. We're going to skip to the Fourth Amendment, where this is really about privacy. The government can't just come in and search whenever they want. And this amendment really protects those citizens, saying that if the government wants to come in, they've got to have a warrant and they've got to have probable cause to get that warrant. The Fifth Amendment is about protecting the rights of the accused. So if we accuse someone of a crime, they have the right to remain silent. You can't try someone for the same crime twice. So we have things like that built in to protect the citizens. And then within going over to the